Okay, so I've got my branch texture here. Let's take it back into Maya and assign it to some polygons. So back in Maya, what we want is we actually want to create a plane exactly the same size and shape as in dimensions of our texture, and then we're going to map our texture onto that plane. So we'll be creating a shader for that. So let's figure out what our dimensions are. Go back to my images, source images folder here in my project folder. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with this whole concept of a project folder, just Google how to create project folder Maya, and you'll find a really easy to follow tutorial somewhere. Okay, so the exact size and shape of my texture. It looks like it is 800 by 800. Now, if I created a plane in Maya that's 800 by 800, it would be huge, but that's okay. We are going to use a fraction of that. First off, this plane I've created, as you can tell, has 200 tries. That's way too many. We don't need that many tries for a branch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the grid here. I'm going to reduce this significantly. And I can do that right away under the inputs. So it's under channel box, inputs, polyplane 1. If I click on that, you'll see my subdivisions width and height. So it's 10 by 10, which has given me my 100 quads or 200 tries. I'm going to change that subdivisions width and height to 3 by 3. And so now I've only got 18 tries. Way better. And it's given me a bunch of vertices that I can play with to add a lot of shape to this branch, which is going to be quite exciting. Okay, so I have a polyplane with exactly the right number of tries that I want, and we are going to change this to the ratio of our image. Now, 800 by 800 is a square image, so I'm pretty sure the texture would work right now. Let's make that image a little bit more interesting so that we have to do a bit more work. So I'm just going to quickly crop this so it's no longer a totally square image, because I want to show you, give you something that's a little bit more useful to you. And we'll save that as another PNG. Just save over the last one. Okay, so our dimensions now 800 by 719. That makes for a much more interesting time. Okay, so we want this to be roughly the proportions of 800 by 719. So if I just change this to scale X, 800, scale Z, 719, that's a very big branch. That's entirely too large. But what we can do is just add a decimal point in here, and I'm just going to change that to 8.00 and 7.19, and suddenly we have ourselves a branch that is much more manageable, and you can see how this can actually fit the size of your tree. Okay, next step is we need to now attach our texture to this branch. I am going to do a new operation like texturing, so I want to delete history. And I also want to make sure that I can actually see my texture when it comes on. So I'm going to hit 6 on my keyboard. And that will let me actually see textures when they come in. And so I need to, before I can add a new texture to this, I need to actually add a new material to it. So to add a new material, I'm going to right click and hold on that polygonal object and go assign new material. And what I want is just a Lambert. I don't want this to be shiny. This does not need to be a weird shiny object. So I'm just going to go Lambert. and that has assigned a Lambert 2 to it. Now if you've clicked away and you're like, oh crap, where did my material go? Just select it again and the object, and you'll see Lambert 2 chilling over here. It's the it's like the final tab. And if you can't see those tabs and you're like, oh my gosh, I've selected this and I can't see my tabs, what am I gonna do? Just go Control A. You get your attribute editor back. You can also just select the tab up here that looks like a list of rectangles, really. And that will give you your attribute editor. Okay, so to create a texture for this material, we are going to be using the color channel, which is just at the top here. And specifically, this little white and black checker icon on the right of the color channel. If I click on that, it says, well, it's basically gives me the option to pump any one of these options into that color channel. The one I want specifically is File as the fourth one down, and that's going to allow me to attach, you guessed it, a file to this object. So I'll select File, and that takes me to this file browser window. Again, if I've lost track of that and I've clicked away, all I have to do is select the object, and under the color channel here, I now have this little black arrow icon, and if I click on that, that takes me to my file node. So where it says image name, you've got this little yellow folder icon to the right. If I click on that, I can now browse for my texture. Now the reason why we saved it in source images, you'll notice this folder opened automatically because I have set my project to the low poly tree folder. Once again, if you have no idea what I just said, just Google how to set a project in Maya, and you'll find a lot of resources there. So because I've set my project, every time I want to save my scene, it'll go directly into scenes, and every time I want to load a texture, it's going to open my texture folder, which is source images. Okay, so here's my Maple branch version 2, and I'll just click open on that. And because our polygonal plane here is exactly the same dimensions as our maple branch, it looks pretty freaking good. I'm liking the look of that. Now I can't see it on the other side. Now sometimes when you can't see the texture on the other side, that means that double-sided faces is turned off. And if I go Control A, bring my attribute editor back, and I go to plane shape 1 here, that tab in the middle, and down to render stats, you'll see that double-sided is actually turned on. But what I can do is on the viewport, right next to panels, you've got this renderer option. If I change that to legacy high quality viewport, I can now see the texture on either side. I've lost my lighting, but I want to see the texture. That's what I'm really after. Okay, last thing before we, two last things before we duplicate this around. I want to give this a little bit more shape, and I want to move the pivot point to this branch, where the branch will actually come out from the tree. So to give it more shape, we just need to go into vertex mode, and I will quite actually grab some vertices and just build in a bit of a curvature. Whoop, too much. What I want to do is I don't want any part of this to be totally flat. I think that would be that'd be a waste. The waste of having those polygons. So just building in a little bit of visual interest. Just got that curve going to it. Cool. We now have that curved branch hanging out. If I turn off wireframe on shaded, it looks modeled from this far away. It's hard to tell that it's just 9 quads. Okay, so curvature's done. Let's move the pivot point to the end of that branch. So to move my pivot point, I just hit Insert on my keyboard, And that gives me this, would you like to change your pivot manipulator? And I'll just drag on these arrows until it's pretty much in position where I want it to be. I'm going to set it not quite on the end, just a little bit inside. And of course I do need to raise it in the y-axis as well. I really want that pivot point to sit right on the end of the branch. When I like my position, I'll hit insert again, and there we go. I can now very easily rotate this around from just that point. And if I hold down V, I can snap this to my branches. And I'm going to put one of these pretty much everywhere where there's a vertice point. Everywhere where one of these branches sort of changes direction and skews off. And some of these I might scale them in, some of these I might scale them up. But I'm just going to keep duplicating and rotating and changing how this how these all sit until I've covered my tree with maple leaves. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and do that, and you should totally have a go at it yourself. Hey, so I've done half of this tree, and you can see that it's starting to look pretty cool. And I'm still well under 3,000 tries. And you can just see, I'll just turn on wireframe unshaded so you can see all my duplicates there. And I've just been duplicating a group of 2 or 3 at a time and snapping them to these little twigs by holding down V and then snapping vertices. So as you can imagine, once this is finished, it's gonna look pretty nifty. In a future tutorial, we'll go through and we'll talk about texturing the branches themselves, which we made easier by doing some UV mapping earlier. We'll just need to update those UV maps since we've done quite a bit since then. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and we'll catch you in a future tutorial.